Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Irene Moncada, an Events Commissioner here at Unicom Seminars. We are pleased to be hosting a webinar titled An Introduction to Most Common Cybersecurity Challenges and Threats. The webinar is presented by Jean Lehmann, CEO and founder of CyberCapital HQ. Jean Lehmann is a cybersecurity expert, founder and CEO of CyberCapitalHQ.com, and editor and business ambassador for Hedge Think, a digital media platform for the hedge fund industry. At this point, I would like to hand over to Jean. There will be opportunities for your questions and answers at the end of the presentation. We hope you enjoy the webinar and we welcome your feedback. Over to you, Jean.
Thank you very much, Irene, for this introduction. So this webinar is an introduction to most cybersecurity challenges and threats. It's not meant to be very technical, so you don't have to be a techie or geek to understand what we'll be talking about. The idea is to give some context and fundamental definition about cybersecurity challenges and the latest developments in cybersecurity. So the agenda for today will be the following. We have 7 parts. First part, I will give some historical context in cybersecurity. Then we will look into understanding the cybersecurity landscape with examples of high-profile attacks and how the threat lifecycle and the motivation of hackers has changed over time. Then we will define APT, Advanced Persistent Threats, and the characteristics of advanced malware and botnets to show that we have evolved from a world where opportunistic attacks were prevalent to now a more targeted complex attacks by hackers. Then we will explain why the legacy port-based firewalls and the intrusion prevention systems are actually out of date to counter most targeted attacks. And then now we will present the next generation firewalls that are much more efficient into countering the new threat landscape. Then finally, we will look into best practices for controlling APT and as well the policy framework for threat protection so that you can actually implement within your company. Okay, let's give some introduction about and definition about cybersecurity. First of all, I actually encourage you to read my article that I wrote on Intelligent HQ, an introduction to cybersecurity. But let's define cybersecurity. So cybersecurity can be defined as the body of technologies, processes and practices designed to protect networks, computers, programs, and data from attacks, damage, or unauthorized access. So historically, the first computer worms and viruses actually appeared in the 80s and the 90s. For example, we had one of the first virus and worm, which was the Morris virus, which could represent the first denial of service attack. We will define later what is a denial of service attack, but generally speaking consists of sending traffic to a network to disrupt the good functioning of that network by overwhelming the network with too much traffic. So from this very moment, people started to actually realize that they actually needed strong security to protect the business internationally and globally across different networks. And then in the 90s emerged the first viruses targeted to email services. And at that time, hackers didn't really have an incentive to get a financial reward from those attacks. They were just doing these attacks for fun. So, but from these moments, opening attachments from unknown senders actually became known as bad practice, and we'll see how phishing attacks, which are actually one of the most common attacks over the internet, can be very detrimental to your endpoint and networks. And then at the beginning of the 2000s, new threats emerged concerning much more serious threats concerning the stealth of financial data, in particular stealing credit cards by hackers, which could have very serious financial consequences on companies. As an example, in 2005-2007, TJ Maxx, which was the target of an attack, lost $256 million as a result of being stolen an estimated 45.7 million payment card details, which could be sold on the black market, as we will see. So it evolved really into a very serious threat, and that's now in the headlines. So we'll see regularly systems being hacked and the new threats being discovered. So in a way, I would say that the behavior of hackers and attackers has evolved from passive to active. In a way, in the beginning of cyber threats and cybersecurity, hackers were kind of looking at I would say, the path of least resistance into a company. They were not that much insisting into breaking a company. If the network was secure and robust enough, they wouldn't insist so much. But now the threat landscape has completely evolved into much more serious attacks that can be actually targeted attacks to a specific user or network. And hackers can be very effective and efficient into breaking now into networks through targeted attacks. So we have evolved from a world of opportunistic attacks to targeted attacks. Also, both still remain very much of actuality. So let's see. I mean, one of the core and fundamental building block and a broad term in cybersecurity is actually a malware. So basically, what is a malware? A malware is a malicious software that can include the botnets, viruses, worms, Trojan horses, spyware, adware, or backdoors. And the purpose is to actually damage, disable, take control, or steal information for a computer system or network. And the reality is that any organization can be the target of a cyber attack. I would say any individual or organization, independently of its size, can be the target and victim of a cyber attack, as the degree of sophistication of attacks is constantly increasing. Let's give a few examples of some high-profile attacks in the recent years. In 2011, we had Sony. The PlayStation network was hacked, and credit cards data was stolen from concerning information around 100 million subscribers. It's a huge number, and the financial impact was massive, since it is actually valued to $171 million for that hack. And again, Sony in 2014 was hacked by, it is presumably, people believe actually in the industry, that North Korea was actually the sponsor of that attack. So we'll also look at who are behind the attacks. So North Korea may have sponsored the attack, and they managed to steal information about employees, the social security numbers, the families, the emails, salaries, confidential email, even copies of unreleased Sony films. So one can imagine that the financial cost of such an attack is very important, estimated at $100 million in this case. We also had in the UK, recently in November 2015, the TalkTalk attack, whereby 4% of TalkTalk 4 million customers had the data breach, an attack that would cost the company up to £35 million. And the attack in this particular instance was a combination of DDoS and SQL injection attacks, which we will look into more technical details of this, of what DDoS and SQL injection means later on. And interestingly, this attack was actually performed by 2 teenagers. So the point here, which is interesting to make, is that actually the barriers to entry for hackers, due to the evolution of technology, have considerably come down. So in a way, almost anyone can become a black hat, so-called black hat, or a hacker. The availability of information about how to hack a network, how to engineer or orchestrate a phishing attack, a DDoS attack, a SQL injection, is actually widely available. So it's actually relatively easy. Also, it's obviously unlawful, but technically it's relatively easy to engineer and orchestrate a cyber attack. We had also Ashley Madison in July 2015, in our RSA in 2011, where as a result of a phishing attack, the hacker could monitor ongoing and outgoing traffic, steal passwords, and related sensitive data. So these were a few examples of recent high-profile attacks and the consequence of those attacks. So one of the most common information and attack the integrity of the network and monitor the incoming and outgoing traffic between the network and the endpoints. It's actually worth mentioning that those phishing attacks often are performed via emails, but it doesn't have to be the case. It can be done through a URL into a microblogging platform like Twitter or Facebook on the message boards. And in a way, the attackers' motivations are actually interested in stealing all sorts of data that can potentially have a financial value on the dark web, like credit card information, social security number, health-related information, that can be monetized into the dark web. So the hackers have very various profiles. They can be isolated teenagers, hackers. They can have lots of resources available to orchestrate an attack. They have strong technical know-how. They may be well-funded and organized by governments like North Korea, as we said, and they may know actually what to do with the stolen information, just as such as intellectual property, and sell it on the black markets. So this gives some background information about the context. Now let's have a closer look into what is the life cycle of an attack. And actually, a cyber attack follows different phases. And those phases are infection, persistence, communication, and command and control. So that's generally the case, the framework for orchestrating a cyber attack. So let's look at those subsequently. So infection. So basically, generally, an infection will be done by the combination of a malware and exploits that are actually closely interrelated. So generally, exploits are used to attack a target system and infect it with a malware. So generally, for instance, a DDoS attack. So what is a DDoS attack? A DDoS attack is overwhelming a network by a high number of traffic, a very high intensity traffic on the network in order to disrupt the network, so that, for example, a website will not be active for a certain period of time. And for example, the attackers may be motivated by getting a ransom from a DDoS attack. But generally speaking, attacks are actually combined in order to make them efficient. So for example, a DDoS attack may be combined with a malware, or a DDoS attack may be combined with a SQL injection. So in the case, for example, of TalkTalk was a DDoS plus SQL injection. SQL injection is actually an attack using where the aim is actually to gain unauthorized access into a network, into a database, by exploiting the weaknesses and vulnerability within the SQL code of the database. So that's so generally, I mean, the idea is to understand that generally those attacks actually are combined and come together to exploit the vulnerabilities within a network. So as we mentioned, the landscape has very much evolved from targeted attacks from opportunistic attack to targeted attacks. So in a way, the targeted attacks may be customized specifically for the target network. So that's why the traditional antivirus may actually have some limitations, because the traditional antivirus are actually signature-based detection, meaning that once a malware is actually identified, it has a signature. What is a signature? A signature is like a fingerprint, which allows to actually identify uniquely a malware. So what do the traditional antivirus do? Basically, they maintain a large database of those signatures, and when they recognize a malware with that signatures, they then block the entry. But the problem is that with targeted attack and APT, advanced persistent threats, the malware may not be detected due to mutation of the malware and due to the fact that, for example, the malware may be coming within a layer, within the security of an encrypted channel. So it's actually much more difficult to actually prevent a targeted attack. Then the second stage of the life cycle of an attack is the persistence. So the idea is actually for the hacker to maintain a foothold within the network of the company which is a target. And interestingly, some intruders can stay actually a very long time before they be detected within the network. I mean, we've heard of up to 200 days, 250 days, like a relatively long period of time, whereby an intruder, a hacker, may maintain a foothold within a company without being detected. So that's actually kind of interesting, because that means that during that time window, the hacker is capable of monitoring all the incoming and outgoing traffic, and also stealing all the information which is in the network. So that shows the damage that actually can perform. So the third stage of the life cycle of an attack is actually communication. Communication in the idea of establishing a long-term complex attack. The attackers have to communicate with other infected systems to enable command and control and extract stolen data from a target system or network. And this notion of command and control is actually very important, especially when we talk about the threats like botnets and advanced malware, whereby command and control server is actually an entity, is a machine which can remotely control what an infected machine within the network of the company which is targeted can actually do. So basically, command and control will control the infected machine or the infected machines within the network of the target company. So, so that's the notion of the communication between endpoints in a way. So command and control, very important notion, so which is actually the step after communication. So, and the thing is that often the command and control traffic is encrypted using backdoors and proxies, and that's one of the additional difficulty to identify the traffic, the malicious traffic within the overall traffic. And we will see how the next generation firewalls can actually perform those tasks of, I would say, filter the traffic from good and bad traffic. So that's actually one of the key characteristics of the next generation firewalls, the ability to filter traffic and to identify the good traffic from the bad one, and then take the enforcement steps. So, important points to remember that in a way, a threat is a framework. So we have those steps of infection, persistent communication, and worth mentioning that traditional security solutions, the legacy firewalls, IPS, intrusion prevention systems, antivirus, content filtering, though they may provide a first layer of defense, they are actually not adapted to identify, correlate, and counter complex coordinated attacks and targeted attacks that use multiple attack vectors. But the good news about is that attackers have evolved, but also security has evolved as well. So there are solutions. But having said that, it seems that the hackers are kind of seem to have always often I would say, a forward-looking view in the sense they are often more advanced than actually the technologies that aim at countering them. So in a way, the cyber criminal, the hackers, and the malware involved in a very dynamic fashion. So it's not clear who is actually winning the war. But the reality of the market is that there are solutions, there are new solutions that exist, in particular through next generation firewalls, and also now we're talking about the technology as machine learning and deep learning for zero-day threats, and that we'll cover later. So as we indicated earlier, 40 to 50% of newly identified malware found in enterprise networks lacks signature coverage from any of the top antivirus vendors. So as we said, the signature is that fingerprint that whereby the antivirus has the ability to uniquely identify a given malware. The problem is that the advanced malware, they have the ability to mutate. So, and through mutation, they may be able to avoid detection by traditional malware signatures. And then the hackers, they also may develop customized piece of malware targeted against a specific individual network. So as long as it is not identified as a new signature, it will not be identified by the traditional antivirus mechanisms. So let's have a look at the other characteristics of advanced malware. So we mentioned the botnets. So, and the DDoS attack. So a botnet is a network of infected machines whereby you have like what's called zombie endpoints which can be spread out all over the internet and controlled by certain servers called the command and control. And those botnets can be very powerful to actually engineer and orchestrate distributed denial of service attack. Because in a way, if you're from any computer, one can potentially target a website and do a DDoS attack and disrupt the website with, I would say, overwhelming traffic. But the thing is that if you use a botnet and a high number of those computers, then the DDoS attack can be like thousands of times more powerful than just using the network. So the hackers, when they are actually very well organized, they have the ability to, from a command and control server, to control up to thousands of different computers to actually engineer a DDoS attack and have a very disruptive effect on a server, on a website, which was the case of the Talk attack in November 2015. And the motivations often can be a ransom. They will blackmail, the hackers will blackmail the company and ask for a ransom in order to stop the DDoS attack. So there are ways actually to disrupt or to kill a botnet, I would say to make the botnet ineffective, but it's actually very complicated. The reality of the market is that to fight against botnets, it can actually be a process which can take many years. So those botnets are a serious threats to legitimate companies. So the takeaway here is to understand that traditional port-based firewalls, IPS, intrusion prevention systems, actually lack the effectiveness to protect corporate networks. So now, in the past, the malware was delivered to end users through email, and now applications can be exploited to spread malware in unpredictable ways. So when we look at applications such as social media platforms, Facebook, microblogging like Twitter, webmail application, instant messaging, file transfer apps, they all can be attack vectors. So they can all be attack vectors, and not for phishing attacks. So not necessarily an email, but it can be also done through an application. So in a nutshell, one cannot control threats that can be seen on the network, and APT managed to hide their existence on the network. So it's important to make that differentiation between the capability that the hackers can actually gain through the applications and the endpoint attack vector. So there is always a trade-off between the application's vector and the endpoint vector. So the idea is that the many applications are actually designed to circumvent traditional port-based firewalls, and also many applications also use SSL encryption. So malicious traffic can actually be embedded into legitimate encrypted traffic. So these are again attack vectors to actually have malicious traffic embedded within legitimate traffic. So yes, so we said that the signature avoidance was the initial approach to detect and block malware, but now it's in a way it's outdated in the sense that signature-based approach cannot block advanced persistent threats, and in particular also zero-day attacks. So the idea here is to understand that the port-based firewalls, IPS, proxies, and all legacy-related firewall systems are actually limited into countering the most recent attacks. So let's now talk a little bit more details into the next generation firewalls and what are the capabilities of next generation firewalls to counter the attacks and the advanced persistent threats where the previous legacy port-based firewalls didn't have those capabilities. So in a way, it's important to understand that the next generation firewalls bring a higher degree of visibility and control over the traffic by really performing a true classification of traffics based not simply on port and protocol, but also on an ongoing process of application analysis, decoding, and decryptions. So really the key here is the ability to filter out the traffic between legitimate and non-legitimate traffic. So in a way, one has to think of in terms of when one look at the traffic of the internet, I would say one has to think in terms of the layers of an onion that represents the traffic, and when we peel back successively the layers of the onion, then we can make a distinction between legitimate traffic and non-legitimate traffic. So that's the fundamental idea behind the next generation firewalls. Furthermore, the next generation firewalls actually provide an integrated approach to threat prevention by coordinating different security disciplines such as application identity check, malware, and exploit detection, IPS. So I would say a few years ago with legacy firewalls, one had to try to integrate different technologies for different attack vectors. And now with the next generation firewalls, the idea is that one can have an integrated approach whereby all the attack, I would say the mechanism to counter the attack through the different vectors can be combined and integrated into a unified approach. So that's the idea of next generation firewalls. Having said that, there are measures that a company needs to take in order to improve its security. So let's talk about a few of those measures. The first is to actually reduce the attack surface by eliminating the bots hidden within the corporate network, gaining full visibility and control on the traffic, and allow only legitimate traffic within the network. So the idea of positive control is to allow only legitimate application and traffic that are designed instead of blocking unwanted traffic. So it's actually much more efficient, because if we have identified the applications that we really want, we just gain access to those applications, and then we allow what's called positive control. So this is a technology solution. At the same time, a company in parallel with those technology solutions need to implement security policies within organizations as of which applications and protocols will be allowed within the network, and which users are granted access to those applications. So some businesses will completely, for example, if we take an application like Facebook, you can actually both have a private and professional usage. So some companies will completely ban Facebook from the users, and some will have a restricted usage. So one has to be very much aware of the dangers and the potentialities in terms of threats when one allows certain applications to last Facebook. But there are measures that can be taken in terms of implementing the appropriate policy within the company. So yes, so when we look at the next generation firewalls capabilities, as an example, they can block bad applications coming from peer-to-peer file sharing. They can limit the application usage only to authorized and legitimate users. They can disable certain features in high-risk applications such as tunneling, desktop sharing, file transfers. They can identify compromised web pages that download malicious files without the user's knowledge. They can decrypt SSL, secure socket layer traffic selectively. So for example, they would not decrypt financial traffic or health-related information traffic, but the social network traffic and webmail traffic will be decrypted in order to, again, identify between legitimate and malicious traffic within the network. And also the next generation firewalls capabilities, they can find and analyze unknown traffic in the network. So in a nutshell, we can say that next generation firewalls can provide an integrated intrusion and threat prevention, as well as malware protection and URL filtering. The key resides in finding and analyzing unknown traffic, You can either go a next step further by analyzing unknown finds in a sandbox environment to identify malicious activity. So just a word about a sandbox. It's an important notion, and it's also a good complementarity to firewall, next generation firewalls. In a way, a sandbox comes into play when we actually make the differentiation between a structural quality and a behavioral quality. So it's a form of a behavioral analysis. In a nutshell, a sandbox is like a virtual environment where the behavior of a suspected file will be analyzed. So in a way, it's like a quarantine for files that actually may contain malicious code. So a sandbox can actually be implemented as part of a firewall in order to try to analyze those files which actually is suspicious and may contain a malware. So sandbox often have to be linked to a next generation firewall so that analysis can be made within the sandbox and also bring enforcement capabilities. So basically the idea is to analyze the behavior of the file, but at the same time decide what to do with the file if one has identified a compromised file. So so that's in a way that's the piece related to the technology. I mean, in a broader framework. At the same time, it's important to stress that companies need to implement, in conjunction with technology solutions, best practices and threat protection policies. It has to go hand in hand. It has to go together. So the idea of the purpose of enterprise and purpose of enterprise security policies is actually to control malware and reduce the risk of being infected by APT. They are complementary to technology solutions. So let's have a look at the scope of those policies. So first of all, we have to start with the users and application controls, because in a way, the weakest link within an organization is essentially the users and what they do, how they behave, and what kind of applications they use, what kind of applications they have access to, and they're allowed to have access to, and so on and so forth. So this is part of the overarching corporate security policy. And the thing is that in terms of corporate security policy, it's a conjoint effort in a way, because there are so many stakeholders involved. In particular, we can say that they have to be IT has to be concerned, HR has to be concerned, executive management has to be concerned, and ultimately the end users also have to be concerned. So those policies can concern, for example, the regulated use of such a social media application like Facebook or Twitter, which can actually represent entry points for the propagation of threats, breaches, and data loss. So organizations must develop, enable, and enforce the appropriate use of social media within their network perimeter. So the corporate policy should encompass user controls and applications usage policy, as we mentioned, then the network controls, so looking at the traffic from non-malware, identify command control patterns, exploits, malicious URL, and a risky file, and in a way there should be a single unified policy across solutions, modules, and monitors. So the network controls, as we mentioned, it's an absolute necessity to maintain visibility into the traffic content, as IT in a way should have the ability to look into the different channels, in particular the encrypted channels, and to have the ability to selectively decrypt those channels to filter out the traffic. And then we have the endpoint controls, where one needs to have a proper anti-malware installation, make sure it is up to date, very important to up to date the installation of the anti-malware. And as we mentioned, today, the reality of the market and the threat landscape is such that the majority of threats continue to be known threats with known signatures. So known threats comprise 95% of all threats. But having said that, that means there are 5% of threats that are completely out of control, and that's why it's paramount importance to implement those measures and capabilities with next generation firewalls. And we could say actually also a few words about the type of zero-day attacks, which are those zero-day attacks, which are the attacks that are not part of the overall signature. And there are now technologies that are being discussed, I would say, that for coming to the market around using artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning to actually increase the success rate of identifying the unknown attacks. So the technology is very much evolving in order to counter also the evolving landscape of threat actors. So now let's say a few words about a few best practices to manage advanced persistent threats and to have a secure network. And ultimately, I mean, it's close. One cannot. Well, it's virtually impossible to have 100% secure network, but we can implement best practices to actually reduce the likelihood of being the victim of an opportunistic or targeted attack. So first, implementing next-generation firewalls to classify the application traffic. Then we need to segment the network internally by protecting your assets. Filtering applications to avoid high-risk applications due to the high number of applications in the ecosystems. So like, for example, block anonymizers such as Tor, limit proxies, limit peer-to-peer applications, limit remote desktop protocols and applications to authorize users with a legitimate business need. Then our best good practice is to actually selectively decrypt and inspect SSL traffic. So for example, we wouldn't decrypt the healthcare and financial related traffic, but we would decrypt social networking, web-based email, instant messaging, message boards, and microblogging. Then we need to block URLs known to host malware and exploits, use sandbox to identify unknown files, and block known exploits and malware. So in a nutshell, that's a few best practices. So I think I've been talking for about 40 minutes. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope you found this webinar interesting. So the idea was to give you an overall an overview on the evolving threat landscape and how it has evolved within the last few years and how it is likely to evolve in the future. So thank you very much for your attention, and please feel free to send any questions you may have.